invoke a lot of different ideas of what I might be speaking about. But no, I'm going to be talking about a miracle that happened in my life, like just about a miracle, and then I'm going to give some Marxist analysis. Well, I'm not giving it. I'm going to read it of the economy. Okay, um, the miracle that happened. So anybody out there who's a close watcher, I don't really know if there are any. There might be though, one or two, would know that I was really in the dumps the other day. Like I was really depressed. I was really down. I was really feeling, and I think justifiably so, that just, just my life has been crap, like for a really long time, just about the whole entirety of it, actually, going back to my childhood. And there really hasn't been a lot of good. I mean, yeah, like there has been good things, but it's been very fleeting and short-lived. And so it can seem, if you get to let the negativity really take hold in your mind, it can seem that the good things are so exceptional to the endless monotony of crap that is the majority of my life, that almost those good things are almost like teases. Like they almost make the bad worse because you know what you're missing and you just get a little taste of good, but you never really get to enjoy it. Yeah, so I was pretty negative. I was pretty negative. Um, and then a miracle happened. Just about a miracle. The way that it all lined up, I mean, I can't really say it was a miracle. It wasn't a miracle in the religious sense of how that word technically means, but it was a pretty amazing thing that happened. A really, 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 really good thing happened to me. Okay, when I was just about at my lowest point. And I can't talk about it right now. Maybe in another time I would, but right now I can't even say what the good thing was. Um, but the way how it also lined up, like there was a lot of synchronicity going on too. So I can't really even say about that because then you'll know what I'm talking about. Um, but just suffice to say, something amazing happened, and it had a lot of synchronicity, a lot of coincidences were going on at the same time. That's like I couldn't have written it if I was writing a fictional story. I wouldn't have written it that way because I would have thought it's too hard to believe that life would actually go that way. That things would be that coincidental. Like it was like something from a movie or something. It was just unbelievable that this was actually happening in a good way, in a good way. Um, so that's awesome. I hope it continues. Needless to say, I'm in a much better place in terms of my attitude, my mental health. Like I feel like I'm a lot brighter and happier today compared to what I was a couple days ago. Um, and now I'm scared because there is this whole trend. It is true that I mean, even this wonderful, great thing that happened to me. It kind of does hold up to the trend that, oh well, the good things only happen when I'm in a totally negative mindset, like just totally negative thinking. That's when the good things and the best things happen to me. So, and then when I'm in a, so that makes it like I'm scared to be happy, like because then good things will stop happening. Like I have to be, even not just sad, like I have to be like really down. Like I was really down for something good to happen. So, and it's like usually when I'm happy is when the bad things happen. So, you know, so there was this video that I made called Hopeless, and I was just describing my hopelessness a couple days ago. And so it was after that video that this amazing, wonderful thing happened to me. And so now I've made that video private. You can't see it. I've taken it so that people can't see it. Now I'm scared. I'm scared. So does that mean that the bad things are going to start happening again? Like, oh, no, he's not completely in the dumps, so we better send more crap his way. Like, that's kind of how it feels. So, but I'm going to test it out. I'm going to test it out. I'm going to leave it private. I'm not going to bring it back. I'm going to try to stay in a positive mindset, and we'll just see. We'll just see if good things continue, or if we get a return to horrible crap, then I'll know, uh-oh, well, okay, I have to be in a negative mindset again before good things can happen. And I'll turn the video back on to public at that point. Okay, if that does happen. But I'm hoping, wouldn't it be nice? Like, wouldn't it just be nice if good things, like, I'm not saying total miracles have to happen all the time, but just like good things. Wouldn't it be nice if like good things were to happen to me without me being in a complete depression? Like, without me being like so down in the dumps before something good can happen. And as long as I'm, kind of happy, then I get nothing but crap. Like, wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to be scared to be happy? Like, if I could just be happy and then more good things could keep happening on top of that happiness that I already have. Like, wouldn't that be nice? So that's my challenge. Like, because part of this was a challenge to my ancestors, because the psychics keep saying, "Oh, your ancestors are protecting you. Your ancestors are protecting you," and I was like, "Really? They are? You call this protection? Like, they're keeping me alive." I thought that, but to live in a life of misery, like, is that really protection? So, and then something amazing happened. So this is my next. So then I feel like my ancestors came through. If indeed it is ancestors, what these psychics are saying is true. So my next challenge to the ancestors. Thank you for that. And my next challenge to the ancestors would be, okay, so can you make life worth living? Like, can you make it so that I don't have to be in a complete, utter dump despair before anything good happens? Like, can you just make good things to happen just because I deserve them and I don't need to be completely down in the dumps for it to receive it? Like, could you do that? Or like, because like I don't want to have to be into such a depressive state before something good happens. So can you do that? That's my challenge to you. Well, I don't know if you're going to be able to do it or not. So this will be a chance to prove it. Prove yourselves. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have to prove myself. You're gonna have to prove yourselves. Okay, that's how it goes. Yeah, yeah. Can the answer? My challenge to my ancestors is: can you keep the good vibes and the good things flowing my way? The happy experiences, truly happy experiences going my way, with me also being in a happy, positive, upbeat mindset. Can you do that? It's not make me have to go into such a negative doldrum before you would send something good my way. I want to know if you can do that. That's my challenge to you, to my ancestors. All right, and to the spirit guides, whoever it is. Okay, so, oh, and I have to also mention, so because I made that hopeless video private, I did not get a chance to respond to someone's comment. Someone, like, because I was talking on there about how, like, my YouTube channel basically gets no attention. Like this live stream right now, like, nobody's listening to it. I wouldn't expect anybody would. There's more privacy on my live streams than in my bathroom, which is where I'm doing this live stream from, ironically. Like, I just get no attention. Where my dead channel that I have been locked out from gets growing gangbusters, but my channel that I post videos on all the time gets nothing. And so somebody did kindly write a comment under that video. It's a video from a live stream. They did write a comment, a really positive, good comment that probably did help me, and I just didn't get a chance to respond to it, or to probably even to click like on that comment itself. I didn't get a chance to, because this amazing, wonderful thing started happening to me, and I had to go live life. Okay, but then I made the video private, so like, I can't even see the message now, I don't think, because it's private. Or like, even if I was to respond to it or click like you wouldn't know that I was responding to your comment, because now it's a comment that's under a video that's gone private. So I can't communicate with you other than right now I'm hoping that you're watching, or in this edited clip that I'm going to make from this. I hope whoever wrote that comment under my hopeless video is watching, and because I want to say thank you. Like, thank you for your comment, and thank you for your uplifting advice. Regardless of the content of what you were saying, just the fact that somebody responded in a caring manner really helped out quite a bit. So I appreciate that, and I thank you. Okay, so moving on, I am going to now change gears, and we're going to now talk about, I want to read an article from Zero Hedge, okay? So I'm going to take the camera off me and show you this article. And we're going to look at some of the comments too. So, here's this article. It's called Marxist Macro Model. Lots of M's today. It's an M kind of a day, huh? Now, Um, First of all, before I get into this, Zero Hedge uh, has a bad reputation. Sometimes deserved, but for the most part, undeservedly. Like, pretty much anyone that I was debating with on Twitter or anywhere, like anyone of the pseudo intellectual class of Vancouver, let's put it that way, you know, uh, people who have a loud voice in Vancouver and who talk about political and social matters, they dismiss Zero Hedge as a right-wing conspiracy theory website. And so they're not convinced to read anything from Zero Hedge, even though Zero Hedge has been right and has been quite prescient. If you read, like, it breaks news before a lot of other media outlets do by a long shot, by weeks. It'll be ahead of what's really going on. So I really think that they're impoverishing their outlook on life by ignoring Zero Hedge. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have read it skeptically. Of course you should. And there's been lots of dubious things said on Zero Hedge. So, but that goes for all media. Okay. Uh, and I should say it really helped me, Zero Hedge. I think because I would consider myself like I was. I used to say I was in recovery. I was in recovery after I finished university, my bachelor's and my master's. Like I went through a period of being in recovery because I realized that while I had learned a lot and gained a lot of valuable skills and had a lot of great experiences in university, that it had shifted my thinking in a way that, like, basically I had been brainwashed, is what I'm trying to say. And I knew that on a certain level and that I wanted to undo it. So the antidote, the way to get past the brainwashing, the politically correct brainwashing of university, was to read Zero Hedge, like nonstop. Everything on Zero Hedge, including every comment. Especially back then. So I graduated from my master's end of 2010 is when I finished. So like 2011 and all that, like that was like, because there's censorship is even now happening on Zero Hedge in the comment section. But back then it was totally not uncensored, and it was really important. It was really beneficial. I think I learned a lot and grew a lot from that, and was able, because I'm not throwing away my university education. I learned a lot, and I still incorporate that knowledge going forward. But it was able to counteract the negative stuff that I took forward from after university, the negative, like the brainwashing. So it was able to help me get past that, and it was able to also fill in a lot of gaps in my knowledge as well, just about how markets work. It's kind of shocking. Like, okay, was like trying to become an expert in housing policy with my university, and so that's what I was focusing on for my thesis. And like I certainly learned a lot of valuable information. However, I didn't even understand when I graduated from my master's. I still didn't understand like basics of how housing markets work, like just in terms of interest rates and mortgages. Like I didn't understand that. I didn't understand how well the fact that if you're going to have really low interest rates, that this is going to cause the value of, well, all assets pretty much, but especially housing, like houses. It's going to cause their price to explode for these low interest rates because people can borrow more money. And the fact that they could borrow more money on their mortgage, that means that they could afford to pay more for their house that they're buying. And so low interest rates enable these high housing costs. I didn't understand that. And I should have. Like it's a really basic thing. Like you don't even need to go to university to understand that. So the fact that they let me graduate without understanding that, like, I don't know. I don't think that that was an oversight by accident. I think that that's on purpose. That the universities that I went to really didn't spend a lot of time teaching you about how markets work, as they were more overly focused on teaching you about how markets are dysfunctional and criticizing them. But like some basic market knowledge was just left out. Okay, so Zero Hedge was important for that as well, filling in those gaps. But you know, Zero Hedge, like contrary to how it's popularly perceived as this right-wing site, it actually has a lot of left-wing content. So you're going to get exposed to a fair bit of Marxism on Zero Hedge. So it's just simply not true what people are saying that it's this like right wing conspiracy theory website. Like no, it's not. You're probably going to find right wing content. You're definitely going to find right wing content on there. You're definitely going to find conspiracy theories on there. Yes, but you're also going to find Marxist analysis and conspiracy theories coming from the Marxist side. And just because something is a conspiracy theory doesn't mean that it's not true. Like I'm thinking of Caitlin Johnstone. So she's one of their regular contributors, and um, and she's coming from a left-wing perspective. And I guess you could say she's a conspiracy theorist in a sense. Like she's questioning like um, U.S. hegemony and and military industrial complex and showing the corruption that goes on with that. But she's coming from a left-wing perspective. She's pretty awesome, actually. Okay, let's read this article. Now, it's very technical. I'm going to read the article, and I'm going to look at some of the comments. Okay, Marxist macro model. The last 10 years or so have seen the lowest interest rates and bond yields on record. Definitely the lowest interest rates. Okay, I'm going to start commenting right away. Definitely the lowest interest rates in like hundreds, if not thousands of years. Like it's historically off the charts, what the time period that we're living through right now. No doubt interest rates have been low due to central bank activism, from forward guidance to massive bond buying, like actually buying bonds, like the central banks, like to keep their prices up. Like how corrupt is that? In an historical and economic context, it is very hard to understand why policymakers have set interest rates so extremely low. Well, I guess they're protecting the interests of capital holders. Let's go on. The Bank of England provides a history of the bank rate going back to the 1600s, and the last 10 years has seen the bank rate set at levels below even those seen during the Great Depression. Okay. So look at that. Have interest rates really gone up that much since 2018? But like it got quite high in the early 80s. Anyways, due to World War I and II, which had more an impact on inflation in the UK, I look at US inflation rates to see what trends were like during the Great Depression. Even though inflation has been surprisingly low since 1980 until recently, it never went negative like it did during the 30s. Okay, right? And so there's the zero line for inflation. So anytime you see the line dip below that, that's deflation, that's negative inflation, which would have been like what they had during the Depression. Okay, and so then there's quite a bit of inflation, but you know, it's actually been quite smooth in the latter years, latter decades. But now do we see a big spike in inflation for sure. Okay, if we transform the inflation data from year-on-year trend to an index level, the change inflation trends during the 1930s and 1970s are much more clear. It also makes it harder to understand why interest rates have been so low or even negative in recent years. Like, I don't have a hard time understanding that. When there has been no outright deflation, as we saw in the 1930s. Central bankers would argue that without their intervention, inflation would have been negative. But in a period when Chinese GDP more than doubled, I mean, think about that, and the fact that Chinese GDP is even a factor speaks to the fact that we are in a globalized economy, much more integrated with an economy like China's than we were in previous decades. So even more of a factor that Chinese GDP more than doubled. I feel this is hard to believe. Right, so with Chinese GDP doubling and with China being plugged into the global economy, so with all this money coming out of China, how could inflation have been negative? It's hard to believe. That's what that person is saying with that. Yeah, I mean, we saw no outright deflation as we saw in the 30s. So why did they have to keep interest rates so high? Well, it's because they wanted to keep, like I was saying before, our interest rates so low. like I was saying before, the low interest rates enable these asset bubbles for in housing, for example. So, and wealthy, powerful interests own a lot of assets. So they want to see their assets do well, houses and whatnot. So in order to see that, given that the real economy has been stagnating, the way to paper over that and to make it seem like their assets are still holding value and indeed growing in value, the way that they do that is by lowering these interest rates super, super low. Okay, so I mean, I understand it. I guess he's just speaking facetious. Like, well, like it's hard to justify it. Like that's not a good justification. But that is why the central banks did this to prop up asset prices. Okay, that otherwise would have been under strain. Okay, so what would a Marxian analysis of the world say? You have to remember that Marx died well before any of his dreams of a communist nation was realized. The world that Marx lived in was one of very limited government, limited enfranchisement, and the chaotic boom-bust nature of industrial revolution economics. His analysis, which proved so prescient during the Great Depression, I agree with that, was that the capitalist need to push costs down would eventually lead to weak demand and destruction of capitalism itself. Right. And I mean, I think that that has proven out. It's just that, so pushing costs down means that people don't have enough money because they're paid so low that they don't have demand. It crushes demand, so then people can't afford to buy houses, let alone houses, even other items. And so that leads to the destruction of capitalism itself. I mean, we have seen that play out. And so the response to that, basically to try to save capitalism from these effects, has been the super low interest rates. That's it right there, So because the central banks they knew that demand was weakening, and so the way to counteract that was to lower the interest rates so that like puts more money into the economy by making it cheaper for people to borrow money. And so that makes up for the weakening demand. That actually can increase demand, but it's artificial. It's just happening because of the fact that the interest rates have been lowered by central banks. It's not really truly demand, but anyway, let's move on. It was the failure of capitalist economies and the relative success of command economies that set the scene for large government sectors and government policy focused on full employment and rising wages. I mean, I basically would agree with that. The world we live in today of government sectors taking up a large part of the economy, setting tax policy, free trade agreements, and regulation, was not a world that Marx would have seen. To a degree. To a degree. I mean, there was a lot of government control, though, as well back then. It depends where you're looking. Why I think this is significant is that the 1980s saw a turn to pro-capital policy while it recalls the globalization period we saw before. While it recalls the globalization period we saw before World War I, the reality is that we've never seen a pro-capital era and a large government era before. So the two happening at the same time, pro-capital and large government. I don't know, in the pre-World War period, with notable exceptions of organizations such as the East India Company, business and government were largely separate. Yeah, I don't know about that, especially if we're thinking about Canada, because, I mean, so says notable exceptions of organizations such as the East India Company. So there's other examples like that, like, for instance, Canada. I mean, you're going to have to think about the Hudson Bay Company, right? So that was so instrumental in the development of Canada. And it was basically very closely tied to the state and government. And then if we look at the development of the CP Rail, which was so integral to opening up the Canadian West and really the development of Canada as a country itself, that was government intervention. And, but building up the economy. So there actually was, that sentence I'm not totally convinced on, that before the 1980s, we never saw a pro-capital and a large government era before. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think in Canada we did. But anyways, moving on. It was only in reaction to the Great Depression did government policy and industry begin to work together. True that they became much more coordination. Okay, especially this is true for the USA, this paragraph here. The pro-capital turn in policy in the US in the 1980s was not a return to neoclassical economics that existed pre-1930. It was taking the infrastructure that was pro-labor, right? That's what we had coming out of World War II, and turning it to make it pro-capital. Yes. Any policy that promoted growth in the value of capital and the growth of wealth was smiled upon. Free trade agreements, the opening up of capital markets, deregulation, lower tax rates, anti-union policies, immigration, lower tariffs. Privatization of various assets with natural monopoly tendencies have also favored capital over labor. The continual extension of patent life fit into this pattern. I mean, I would agree with this. Yeah, it's definitely been a period that has favored capital over labor, starting since around 1980, or you could also say starting since around 1971, 1972, which would have been, so that was when this shift really started taking place. The oil crisis, there was an oil crisis that happened at that time. That was also the end of the Bretton Woods agreement, or that, it was the beginning. It was the beginning of globalization as we know it today, with more free flow of trade between countries, starting in the early 70s. This trend has had, oh, and it was also the end of the gold standard, right? So it was the beginning of the U.S. dollar reserve currency, U.S. dollar base as a reserve currency, basically taking the place of the gold standard. That's happened in 1971. Okay, so basically, like 1971, 1972 to 2008 is marked out as a specific period in capitalism. Okay, which is characterized by these things that he just listed off: deregulation, lower tax rates, anti-union policies, immigration, lower tariffs. Then 2008, we had the big crash that happened, which basically was the outcome of all this. And so now it's just gone into overdrive, all these trends continuing, but just into overdrive, and combined with super, super low interest rates, basically to keep the whole thing from crashing. This trend has had two effects. Labor and wages have seen little real growth, as this would have had a negative effect on profits, and policymaking has focused on raising the value of capital. Using Federal Reserve data on net worth and comparing to GDP, we can see that net worth in the US relative to GDP has risen from 320% in the late 70s to a peak of over 600%. Okay, whatever. So the answer to why interest rates were so low is that it was part of a bigger policy shift that voters endorsed from the 80s onwards. Maybe in some areas, some cases. I don't think it had overwhelming support from voters. Really, I don't think it was a reflection of some popular sentiment. No, I would disagree with that. And politicians bent institutions under their control to give voters what they want. Central banks have just been a continuation of these policies. Like, I think a lot of people do want that. Like, people, like homeowners and that, people who are asset rich want the interest rates to keep being low, for sure. But I don't know if that's really been an overall popular sentiment since the 1980s. So where to from here then? The rise of populism, for me, reflects voters' rejection of these pro-capital policies. Like, okay, this is really good. Like, I agree with this. The rise of populism reflects voters' rejection of pro-capital policies. Right. I mean, right there. I mean, pro-capital means you're favoring capital over people. So populism would be at odds with that. It's about favoring the people over the capital. For sure. I agree with that. Tariffs, industrial policy, closed capital accounts, reduced immigration, any policy that boosts wages are now vote winners. Yes, I would agree with that. Personally, I don't see any change to this trend in the foreseeable future. In a very Marxian analysis, I see politics trumping economics. From a financial and political perspective, bonds remain a short. I don't know about politics trumping economics. Isn't it the economics? Like, I don't even see how he comes to this conclusion, because isn't it the economic effects of these low interest policies has, um, been a lowering living standard and declining real wages for people. So that's then in turn causing this political turn to populism. So I don't even see how he comes to that conclusion from this analysis, like that it's politics is trumping economics. No, I think economics is trumping politics, but I agree overall. This is where we're going, and this rise of populism does reflect a rejection of pro-capital policies. Like people need to understand that like we're being robbed basically. Anybody who's a working person who has to work for a living because they're not independently wealthy, they don't sit on a pile of assets and investments that just grows in value and they can live off of those profits. Like if you don't have that, if you have to go out into the world and you have to sell your labor effectively, you have to go and work in order to make money, in order to make ends meet, like anybody like that is being robbed. Like you're literally being stolen from by these policies because it means that as the value of assets and things goes up in response to the low interest rate pumping money into the economy, but so that means that inflation is going up. That means your wages that you're getting, they're not keeping up with the inflation. So you're actually taking a hit into your weight, into how much money you're making. Um, Even if you might get a raise, it's doubtful that that raise is enough to overcome the inflation. Okay. And meanwhile, there's other people who maybe they don't have to work. They're wealthy and they own houses and they own investments and they own assets. And those assets are all going up and up and up and up constantly in response to this situation of low interest rates. So they're making out like they're laughing all the way to the bank. They're making loads of money and they're not even having to do anything for it. And you know, so it is in effect like a form of thievery. So the working people get less and less and less in return for their work. Their spending power is less and less and less. But asset rich people who don't need to work, they're getting more and more and more as their assets continue to grow in value in response to these prices, in response to these policies. This is why we need higher interest rates. And a lot of poor people don't understand that because they see it in a very simplistic way. They will, if I borrow money from the bank, I'd want to have a low interest rate than a higher interest rate. Why should I have to pay all this interest to the bank? That's how they look at it. But they're not considering that the low interest rates is causing all those things that you have to buy, that you have to spend money on. It's causing it to go up in price. So effectively, you're not benefiting from that low interest rates. And poor people in general don't borrow a lot of money anyways, because you do need to have collateral in the first place. And so, you know, poor people don't benefit from low interest rates. Rich people do. People who already own assets because it sees that their assets are going up in value. So this is why we need to have higher interest rates. Okay, and it's not even just higher interest rates. We need to have like shorter repayment terms for mortgages. You know, much more stricter lending in general, so that you know, to turn this around, and then, you know, wouldn't it be great to see it so that working people did not have to take such a huge hit into their earnings through inflation, and that way that working for a living was actually there was more of a financial reward for work, and you know that would actually send more people into the workforce. You know, like for example, how many people who could potentially be working as doctors and that are working in real estate simply because there's more money to be made in it. Like we need to turn that around. We need to reward work and things that contribute value, true value to the economy, as opposed to assets and things and investments. It doesn't help anyone other than the homeowner itself to have housing prices go up year after year after year after year the way that they do. Okay, so I want to take a look now at some of these comments because, you know, it's interesting. It's a very technical article, and it's interesting. It's just interesting, you know, to see. There's some smart people on Zero Hedge that are going to call out some stuff. So let's hear what they have to say. This person is saying, so the answer to why interest rates were so low is that it was part of a bigger policy shift that voters endorsed from the 1980s onwards. Your own charts show the rise in capital dates from 1971, not 1980. Yeah, and I pointed that out. Early 70s is really more of the turning point. 1980 was as well, though, a turning point with there was an oil crisis then with the Iran war. It basically was a continuation. It just got what had been starting since the 1971 continuing into more of an overdrive. Okay, gee, what happened in 1971 that made wealth a question of social proximity to bankers, printing press, and government by way of Cantillon effects and special deals, right? Yeah. And he's talking about the end of the gold standard. That's not capital or capitalism. That's systemic wealth redistribution by means of credit-based currency debasement and dilution. Right. Credit-based currency as opposed to gold standard-based currency. That started in 1971. It's a club, and we're not in it, but the author of the article is, and he promises to be more generous if you make a god king, if you make him a god king in the Politburo. Probably true. Doesn't mean that everything he's saying in his analysis is wrong, but I think it's a good point to point out. That the author is overlooking in his analysis. It's quite conspicuous that it's being overlooked, the end of the gold standard. Boost wages, a game of whack-a-mole. Go back to the drawing board and find the mathematical inequality. Step 1, figure out a way to fix the inequality without kicking down the road and making someone your bitch. Step 2, becoming, okay, whatever. If there's a better economic or political system than what was developed in America in the last 200 years, no one has yet to discover it. Oh, really? I don't think America in the last 200 years is something wonderful. The arrogant Chinese seem to think they've struck the right balance and seek hegemonic status to prove it in other countries. Everyone has to bow to empire eventually. I completely understand the problem and I have the best solution. However, I have no patience dealing with the insufferable fools and prefer to let them wallow in the mud that will one day be their grave. P.S. The Chinese don't have a clue. Okay, these comments are not really adding very much. They just fired thousands in the tech industry only to hire H-1B visa holders by the thousands. You seriously cannot make this up. They work for less than American citizens, and the corps literally save billions in taxes. There you go. Right. And this has been the trend, for some time, is to favor foreign labor, whether it be in sweatshops overseas or as is more common the case now, importing workers from other countries into first world countries, and then the citizens of the first world countries end up being left out of the workforce. Yeah, that is a huge problem, and that's the reason why. That's precisely why in the article the person was mentioning there's more of a turn towards anti-immigration. Ayn Rand was the complete opposite of Marx, and she knew something about communism. Her objectivist system of pure capitalism was argued and only tried in fictional accounts. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Well, there's never been a true unadulterated example of capitalism or of communism. In truth, it's always in practice, it always involves a little bit of both. I'm going to move on from that comment. Elections are rigged, so it doesn't really matter what the voters think. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is a good comment. This article is another whitewash of history, leaving out a critical piece of historical context. Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto would never have been executed as an ideology had it not been for the likes of Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Carnegie in the early 20th centuries. These elites paid for, provided the housing, and basically funded the entire Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. I'm going to say that this is probably true. Definitely Karl Marx was in bed to some degree with big bankers. Because when you look back at the Communist Manifesto, one of the things that he's calling for in that is these strong central banks. Okay, so that was part of it, is to have these strong central banks. So yeah, and of course central banks are anyone who is truly committed to a class analysis and committed to advancing the interests of working class people would not be calling for a central bank, a strong central bank that dictates economic policy. Because, as we've seen, these central banks are catering their policies to the asset holders and the rich, causing their values of their assets to go up. They don't make economic policy around what is to benefit uh, Joe the plumber, so to speak, or some proletariat, some working class person. That's not who central bankers make their economic policies for. So the fact that Karl Marx was calling for central banks to be part of his communist vision going forward is very suspect. It very much it undermines his credibility as to how committed really was he to the working class, because he was calling for something that was very much against the working class. So that is important to point out. If you dig, you will find that the civil unrest in Russia at the time directed towards the Tsar were all organized by union gangs from New York City and Boston. It was American elites who foisted communism on Russia as a means to prevent Russia from emerging into an industrial might via its oil and steel industry, threatening the American industrialists' growing monopolies. While I have no direct evidence on China, it wouldn't surprise me if Mao had assistance from the US to do the same thing to China, prevent it from becoming a rising industrial power. Well, I mean, that makes me think, well, in the China case, it was before Mao, it was the Western interference to keep China down was the Opium Wars. So getting the people hooked on opium. Okay, while I'm preventing it from the tactics haven't changed one bit since the early 20th century. Color revolutions, creating enemies that aren't there, overthrowing governments, conflict, and dollar hegemony have all been used mainly by the U.S. to maintain and dominate the world. Yeah, is it the U.S.? The next person, the Rothschild plan is working well so far. Is it really the U.S. doing this? Well, the U.S. is a vehicle to accomplish it. It's these elites behind the scenes, these elite banker families, like the Rothschilds, for example. And Germany moving Lenin into Russia to foment a revolution with New York bankers help fund, which New York financiers help fund. That worked just a little too well. The sheet always backfires in a big way. Okay. Get rid of the international usurers and the parasitic central banking scheme and everything writes itself, everything. I mean, usurers. So, like, we need to have interest rates, though, but maybe we don't need to have lending, period, as much as it happens. So I would agree with the comment there. And yeah, get rid of the central banks, and the Fed. Mm. Okay, Marx was of course an elite goofball idiot, just like all the other fantasists pushing garbage that is in denial of reality. Interest rates were kept low to keep the fake economy going, and now bankruptcies will go through the roof. Welcome to reality. Yeah. What common people want is a level playing field, and they only get that with a flat tax that neither helps them nor hinders them, but it does stop the elite pigs from gaming the system and making themselves rich off the back of labor. Progressivism is based on favorites, so naturally those in power get to pick, shut it down, and empower the commoners. I agree with generally the sentiment of that, but I think also for the common playing field, we need to address these crazy low interest rates, because that is making it so that it's not a common a level playing field. If you are already asset rich, you can borrow against your assets, and you have such low interest rates, and this is causing those assets to go up even more in value, excluding working people who don't have assets of their own, diminishing their purchasing power, making it so that they can't buy those assets. So then you have what we have in Canada right now with such an extreme housing crisis. America is a fascist corporatocracy. Only corporate and special interest group votes count. I would agree with that. Think of interest rates as a public good. In the same way that pollution of air or water is an externality in business models that has no cost, the destruction of the relationship between interest rates and financial markets is seen as immaterial. Okay, but of course it's not, as I've been explaining. The low interest rates cause the assets prices to go through the roof. So long as business is profitable and markets are supported, the consequences are not considered. Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's some take the red pill. That is some Marxist analysis right there. So, uh, like I don't like all this trash. Like anyone who announces a forthcoming Marxian analysis announced himself as a pretentious dilettante and dumbass. No, like Marx, like the basic idea behind Marxism is of a class analysis. So it's very much applicable to our current situation right now, where class inequality has never been basically never been greater, and these policies in place right now are favoring the rich as capital over the proletariats that don't have any capital. I mean, I see Marxian analysis being very relevant to the current situation. Um, I just think that I think that there's a lot of people are stuck in their ways of thinking. That doesn't mean that we need to go full blown with everything that Marx said, because as I cautioned, even Marx, the Marxist Communist Manifesto itself had the poison pill incorporated in it of recommending central banks. So nothing is pure or nothing is beyond criticism or skepticism. But that doesn't mean throw out the baby with the bathwater. Marx was onto the basic his basic analysis was correct. Class analysis was correct. It's just maybe the things that he was recommending. What do we do about it? That is a bit where it becomes a little bit more troublesome. Yeah, what do we do? End the Fed. Um, as to immigration, the West has watched its civilization transform before its eyes in real time. In many respects, people are just starting to awaken to the horrors of that, despite that many of us have been sounding this alarm for the past 40 years. But they are starting to awaken and they're horrified at what they have awakened into. Now let's see if they have some balls. Well, they don't have balls. They don't. We wouldn't have gotten into this mess if people did. And are people waking up? I don't see any evidence of it. We no longer have a free market society, multinational, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this is a good one. So the answer to why interest rates were so low is that it was part of a bigger policy shift that voters endorsed from the 80s onwards. Okay, not popular support. Like, did you really hear people say, like, oh, clamoring for interest rates in the 80s? No, not popular support. Fed funny money to fill the gaps created by imported deflation. Imported because of importing cheap goods made in sweatshops in other countries. Yes, it's been 20 years since Bernanke promised to counterfeit to infinity. Endless, that you could, meaning that Bernanke, who was the Federal Reserve chair 20 years ago, was saying you could just print money indefinitely. Unemployed people would have been rioting without it, without the lower interest rates. Meanwhile, DC had a plan living high off of Chinese bond purchases. They started promoting clot shot boosters. I'm surprised that Beijing Biden hasn't made boosters a condition of collecting Social Security. Many don't give them ideas. Okay. Lord, in my opinion, it is too late. Our fundamental institutions have failed. Family, church, schools, 3 branches of government, military, press, entertainment, medical, and big business. They have been corrupted by the false narrative of Marxism where everyone is equal and happy. I do not see the United States and the West, for that matter, coming back. I can pretty much relate to that. Rockefeller, CIA, women's rights to kill unborn babies has destroyed true Western civilization. I mean, I would agree with that too, right? So that's getting a little bit off topic for the most part. So anyways, yeah, basically, what are we going to take? What's the take home from this? Is just the last bit here is that, okay, so we've had this period of super low interest rates. It's caused all sorts of distortions in the economy and malinvestment. And one of those is that the gap between the rich and the poor has never been higher as as low interest rates are causing asset prices to go through the roof, and people who don't have access to assets because they simply don't have enough money, they only have their labor to sell, are more and more and more shut out of the economy. Then, I mean, to add to that, then they can't even sell their labor because of all of this stuff of importing third world workers. And that when they do sell their labor, they get such a low pay on it. Like, it's just like, there's no way it doesn't keep up even close to inflation. So yeah, that is going to have political effects, which is that all of these types of things, tariffs, okay, so, more of a focusing on putting your economics of your own country first as opposed to globalization, industrial policy, closed capital accounts, reduced immigration, any policy that boosts wages are now vote winners. Like, I do agree with that. That is because of these economic effects of these choices that the central banks and governments have been making, that is now going to lead to these political effects. So, I mean, I don't know how he says that it means that politics is trumping economics. No, economics is trumping politics. I mean, it's a kind of a chicken before the egg kind of a scenario. Which one comes first? I mean, each kind of reverberates off of each other, economics and politics. But yeah, I do definitely believe that this is the reason for the rise of populism. It basically comes down to this Marxist analysis, which is why, like, I don't understand why left-wing people have to be like are so opposed to populism. Populism is Marxism, is a reflection of class inequalities and class grievances are expressed through populism. So populism is very much in line with Marxism. Maybe some of these, yeah, I'm just gonna say that. Yeah, and I think that rubs some of these right wingers the wrong. These like Ayn Rand uh, um, types, like, who put her on a pedestal. It rubs them the wrong way to think that, but it is true. That is basically true. So, you know, it doesn't even make sense into my mind why populism is really seen as a right wing thing. Um, it's just because the left wing is people don't even think about class politics or Karl Marx or any of that stuff for the most part when they're participating in left-wing politics, because it seems like the big mainstream of the left has just turned, it doesn't even think about those things anymore. It's more about identity politics. But that is not truly leftism. Like, identity politics. That's just some weak substitute that got brought in. But like the real leftism is Marxism and class politics. And that is um, that is very much at play in terms of helping us to understand the rise of populism and indeed the rise of political figures such as Trump. As counterintuitively as that may seem, yes, we can see Trump, as much as he is like kind of epitomizes capitalism and rich. The rise of Trump is actually there's a Marxist analysis to get to understand that, and that is the dissatisfaction of working people and the pain that working people are feeling in the current economic order that's been starting since 1971 and only accelerated 1980 and then 2008 as turning points as well during this time period. All right, that's all I have to say for now. I hope the positive vibes keep going. Clearly, my mind is firing on all cylinders this morning, and so I'm in a good mood. And peace out, everybody. Oh, and I can't stop it. Okay, whatever.